Before he was a prince of Troy, before his name became synonymous with ruin, Paris lived as a simple shepherd upon the sacred slopes of Mount Ida. Stripped of his royal birthright due to a prophecy of doom, he knew nothing of the court's intrigues or the heavy weight of crowns. Here, amidst the whispering pines and ancient crumbling temples of the old gods, he found a quiet sanctuary. The world was vast, peaceful, and untroubled by the drums of war. He was a man rich in nothing but freedom, living in harmony with the earth, completely unaware of the dark destiny that lay sleeping within his blood, waiting for a single spark to ignite the flames of absolute devastation. In this mountain paradise, Paris did not walk alone. He was loved by Oenone, a beautiful mountain nymph who possessed the ancient secrets of healing and the quiet wisdom of the woods. Their love was born of the earth itself, pure, constant, and shielded from the harsh realities of the mortal world. To Oenone, Paris was her entire universe. She saw past his mortal fragility and loved him with the fierce, timeless devotion of an immortal spirit. She believed their sanctuary would last forever, sheltered by the protective canopy of the forest, far from the reach of jealous gods and the greedy ambitions of men who sought to conquer and destroy. They walked hand in hand through forests painted in hues of liquid gold, counting the days by the falling of leaves and the rising of the moon. In those fleeting hours, their happiness was absolute. Oenone whispered of the future, of a quiet life spent in these sacred groves, untouched by the decay of the cities below. But destiny is a cruel weaver, and the thread of Paris's life was already being pulled by unseen hands. The shadows of the trees grew longer, stretching across their path like dark omens, warning of the storm that was gathering just beyond the mountain crest. A storm that would tear them apart and shatter their idyllic paradise forever. The peace of Ida was shattered when Hermes descended from the heavens, bearing a golden apple inscribed to the fairest. 3 goddesses stood before the mortal shepherd, offering him power, wisdom, or the most beautiful woman on earth. Hera promised him empires. Athena offered him unmatched military glory. But Aphrodite, with a knowing smile, whispered of Helen of Sparta, whose beauty rivaled the dawn. Blinded by desire and the intoxicating promise of love, Paris reached out and handed the golden prize to Aphrodite. In that single, fateful moment, he sealed his own doom, choosing a fleeting passion over the eternal peace of the mountains and setting the gears of a catastrophic war into motion. The choice of love. In making his fateful choice, Paris did not just choose Helen. He chose the high contrast drama of a mortal life defined by beauty and blood. Aphrodite smiled, weaving a web of desire that would pull him away from Ida's quiet temples and toward the glittering court of Sparta. Paris stood in the clearing, the golden light of the apple reflecting on his face, his shepherd's crook falling from his hand. He was no longer a child of the mountain. He had become the plaything of the gods, his heart beating with a restless hunger for a queen he had never met. Oenone wept, her prophetic soul seeing the ashes of Troy before they were even laid. She begged him to stay, promising him a lifetime of devotion and safety in their mountain home. But the whispers of Aphrodite had poisoned his mind, filling his heart with a restless ambition. He turned his back on the nymph who loved him, ignoring her desperate pleas and the painful truth of her words. He walked away from the only true peace he would ever know, drawn toward the glittering mirage of Sparta and the beautiful curse that awaited him across the wine-dark sea. Through the grand stone gates of Troy, Paris returned to his father's house, not as an outcast shepherd, but as a celebrated prince. Beside him walked Helen, the stolen queen of Sparta, whose beauty silenced the murmurs of the court. Banners of gold and Tyrian purple fluttered from the towering white marble walls under the midday sun. The citizens cheered their name, marveled at the divine match, and drank to a glorious future. But the wise turned their faces away, for they knew that this match had traded the security of Troy's ancient walls for the absolute wrath of 1,000 Greek ships. In the quiet luxury of their royal chambers, the newly wedded couple found a fleeting sanctuary from the whispers of the city. Bathed in the warm, flickering glow of candles, surrounded by soft silks and gold-woven drapes, they looked at each other with an intensity born of infatuation and fear. They had crossed an ocean and broken ancient treaties to be together. Yet, as Paris held Helen, a shadow of sorrow hung over them. The love that had brought them together was already attracting the storms of Greece, transforming their golden palace into a beautiful prison. The final ship of Paris's fleet anchored in the Troy harbor, its sails dyed red like blood under the setting sun. Helen looked out at her new home, her gold-braided hair caught in the sea breeze, realizing that she could never return to Sparta. Paris stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, feeling the triumph of his stolen love. But the harbor was already being fortified. The fishermen were pulling in their nets to prepare for war, and the wine-dark sea was murmuring of the massive fleet Agamemnon was assembling to bring the towers of Ilium to the ground. The ocean bled black with the sails of 1,000 ships. The Greeks had come, led by the vengeful Menelaus and the power-hungry Agamemnon, demanding the return of Helen and the submission of Troy. The peaceful shores of the Troad were transformed into a chaotic staging ground for the greatest conflict the world had ever seen. The drums of war echoed across the plains, drowning out the gentle songs of Mount Ida. Paris, who had sought only love and beauty, now found himself thrust into a brutal reality of iron, blood, and bronze. The illusion of his romantic triumph vanished, replaced by the grim dawn of an inescapable and devastating siege. While Paris faltered under the weight of his guilt, his brother Hector stood as the unbreakable shield of Troy. Hector fought not for glory or the beauty of a stolen queen, but for his wife, his child, and the survival of his people. Kneeling amidst the blood-soaked soil, he offered his prayers to the gods, begging for a strength that seemed increasingly out of reach. He bore the burden of Paris's choice, his ornate armor reflecting the fires of a war he never wanted. He was a noble warrior, caught in a tragedy of another man's making, preparing to face an unbeatable foe to protect his home. From the high stone battlements of the Scaean gates, the battle-weary defenders of Troy watched the horizon. Their dark bronze armor was covered in dust, sweat, and the dried blood of their comrades. Far below, the Greek campfires flickered like a sea of angry stars, a constant reminder of the siege that had kept them trapped inside their own walls for 10 grueling years. The Trojan soldiers spoke in hushed, weary tones, their faces grimy with soot as the heavy, ash-filled sunset cast a dramatic red glow over the city. They knew that their walls were strong, but they also knew that their resources were failing, and the gods had turned their faces away. When the time came to face the husband he had wronged, Paris's courage withered like autumn leaves. Confronted by the towering, battle-hardened Menelaus on the dusty plains, the young prince shrank back, his heart racing with terror. The pristine armor he wore, untouched by the grime of war, became a symbol of his cowardice. It was Hector who had to step forward, shielding his brother from both the Greek spears and the mockery of his own men. Paris realized too late that the romantic fantasies of the shepherd's life had not prepared him for the brutal, unyielding demands of the battlefield, where love was worthless and only strength survived. The ultimate tragedy struck when Hector fell. Slain by the unstoppable wrath of Achilles, the champion of Troy was dragged behind a chariot in the dust, his noble body defiled before the weeping eyes of his family. Watching from the high battlements, Paris felt his soul shatter. The brother who had protected him, the hero who had carried the entire city on his shoulders, was gone. The weight of Hector's death fell squarely on Paris's shoulders, a crushing burden of guilt that no royal title could ever ease. He knew with a terrifying certainty that he had pulled the trigger that ended his brother's life. Haunted by the ghosts of his choices, Paris wandered into the misty forests bordering the battlefield. Everywhere he looked, he saw the cost of his love for Helen. The ground was littered with the bodies of brave men who had died defending his stolen happiness. Looking down at a fallen soldier, Paris saw his own reflection in the pool of blood beside the corpse. He was no longer the innocent shepherd of Mount Ida. He was a bringer of death, a prince of ashes. The weight of his guilt pressed down on him like a physical force, suffocating him, leaving him to wonder if any victory could ever wash the blood from his hands. Achilles' wrath was not sated by Hector's death. In his golden, god-made armor, he dragged the lifeless body of Troy's noble prince behind his war chariot, carving tracks of grief into the dusty Trojan plains. A massive cloud of dust rose in his wake, illuminated by the tragic, low-angle light of the late afternoon sun. Paris watched from the battlements, his heart cold with horror as he witnessed the desecration of his brother. Achilles rode with a terrifying, wild intensity, a monster of war that no mortal could stand against, his shadow stretching across the plain like a dark promise of Troy's complete destruction. Driven by a desperate desire for redemption, Paris sought to strike down the monster who had slain his brother. Guided by the invisible hand of Apollo, who sought to humble the proud Greek champion, Paris drew his bow within the sacred temple of Apollo. He aimed not for the breastplate or the shield, but for the one vulnerability Achilles possessed, his heel. The arrow, guided by divine malice, flew true through the dim temple air, striking Achilles and bringing the invincible warrior to his knees. It was a triumph, yet it felt hollow, a cowardly strike from the shadows that brought no peace to Hector's restless spirit. Though Achilles was dead, the Greek resolve did not waver. The siege only intensified, the enemy's anger burning hotter with every passing day. On his palace balcony, Paris stood with Helen, the woman he had sacrificed everything to possess. But their love, once a radiant flame, now felt like a heavy chain, binding them to a sinking ship. The beauty that had sparked a war could not save them from its consequences. They watched the horizon, where the campfires of the Greek army flickered like a sea of angry stars, waiting for the final devastating blow that would bring their world crashing down. Then came the day the Greeks seemingly vanished, leaving behind a colossal wooden horse as an offering to Athena. Believing the war was finally won, the jubilant Trojans threw open their gates and dragged the massive structure into the heart of their city. They sang and drank, celebrating a peace that was nothing but a deadly illusion. Paris watched the festivities, a lingering sense of unease gnawing at his stomach. The silence of the abandoned Greek camp felt too quiet, like the breath drawn before a final scream. Troy rejoiced, unaware that they had welcomed their own executioner inside their unbreakable walls. In the dead of night, the belly of the horse opened, and the Greeks poured out into the sleeping city. Gates were thrown open, and the waiting army rushed in, turning the jewel of Asia into a slaughterhouse. Troy burned. The air was thick with the scent of blood, copper, and ash. The grand temples crumbled, and the screams of the dying filled the night. Paris ran through the burning streets, his sword drawn but useless against the overwhelming tide of destruction. The prophecy was being fulfilled before his very eyes. His beautiful city was dying, consumed by the flames of his own selfish desire. Amidst the ruins of his burning kingdom, Paris met his fate. Philoctetes, wielding the legendary bow of Heracles, stepped from the shadows and loosed a poisoned arrow. The shaft struck deep into Paris's chest, releasing the agonizing venom of the Hydra into his bloodstream. Falling to the ground among the dry autumn leaves, Paris gasped for air, his royal red cloak stained with his own dark blood. The pain was unlike anything he had ever known, a burning fire that consumed his veins. The glory of Troy, the beauty of Helen, all of it faded, leaving only the cold reality of his impending death. With his life slipping away, Paris turned his eyes back to where his story began, Mount Ida. He remembered Oenone, the nymph he had abandoned, and her promise that she could heal any wound. Dragging his broken body through the dirt, he crawled away from the burning ruins of Troy, clawing his way up the steep, rocky slopes of the mountain. Every step was an agony of fire, yet he pushed forward, driven by a desperate instinct to survive and a sudden, overwhelming longing for the simple peace he had so foolishly thrown away. He found her at their old sanctuary, standing amidst the ruins of their youth. She looked down at the broken, dying prince, the man who had abandoned her for a mortal queen and brought ruin to his people. Paris wept at her feet, begging for her healing hands to draw the poison from his veins. He pleaded in the name of their past, of the quiet days of golden light and shared promises. But the wounds of the heart are not so easily healed, and the pain of betrayal ran deeper than any poison. Blinded by years of bitter grief and the memory of his betrayal, Oenone hardened her heart. She pulled her gown from his blood-stained fingers and turned her back on him. She told him to return to Sparta, to the queen he had chosen over her, and let her save him if she could. With a heavy step, she walked away into the shadows of the forest, leaving him to die alone in the dirt. It was a refusal born of a broken heart, a tragic act of vengeance that would haunt her for the rest of her immortal existence. Paris drew his last, shuddering breath alone on the cold earth of Mount Ida, his eyes staring blankly at the sky he had once loved. The tragedy of his life was complete. A prince who had sought beauty and found only destruction. He closed his eyes, his breathing slowing, until his chest lay perfectly still under the cold autumn leaves, his tattered red cloak draped over his body like a shroud. Too late, Oenone's resentment shattered, replaced by a sudden, devastating wave of regret. She ran back to him, her heart pounding with a sudden panic, but found only a cold, lifeless corpse. Cradling his dark head in her lap on the damp Mount Ida forest floor, she wept hysterically, her silver hair falling around his face as she begged his spirit for forgiveness. She realized that in killing him, she had also killed her own soul, and the mountain sanctuary they once loved had become a tomb. As the flames of Paris's funeral pyre reached toward the cold, gray autumn sky, Oenone knew her path. She could not live in a world without the boy she had loved. Driven mad by grief, she threw herself onto the roaring wooden pyre, her purple dress catching fire as she embraced his lifeless body in the ashes, reunited at last in the tragic silence of death. The flame of Troy has been extinguished, leaving only the cold ash of memory. If you wish to witness more tales of gods, heroes, and the grand tragedies of the ancient world, subscribe to Mythical Sagas Studio. Join our community of storytellers and never miss a step on the path to legend. More epic stories are already on the way.